Les quiero dar una cordial bienvenida al lanzamiento del proyecto Visible 2021, Laboratorio Editorial de Moda Multicultural. Los quiero invitar primero que todo a elegir el idioma en que quieran escuchar la charla, seleccionando inglés o español en el menú inferior de Zoom, donde aparece un icono de mundo. Dice interpretación abajo y ahí lo eligen. Quiero saludar a las autoridades que hoy nos acompañan, a la decano de la Facultad de Diseño UDD, Alejandra Amenábar, al director fundador de la Escuela Integra, Pablo Jiménez, a la directora de Diseño Gráfico de Diseño UDD, María José Williamson, a la directora de Diseño de Moda y Gestión, Natalia Yáñez, y a nuestra invitada especial, la directora de Arte y Editorial de Lisón Magazine, Dorte de Jesús. Le quiero dar la palabra primero que todo a nuestra decano, Alejandra Amenábar.
Muchas gracias, Dani. Bueno, muy buenos días a todos. Estoy muy contenta de estar esta mañana con todos ustedes, con Pablo, con Dorte, María José, Natalia, en fin, todas las autoridades y todos los alumnos y profesores que nos acompañan. Esta es una ocasión especial, porque nuevamente estamos experimentando uno de los pocos cambios positivos que la pandemia ha traído consigo. Podemos estar reunidos y trabajar conjuntamente, independiente de la distancia física. Aunque celebro esta oportunidad, lo cierto es que el coronavirus ha venido a sumar complejidad a procesos como el cambio climático y la urgencia por entregar soluciones a los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible. Y la industria de la moda es parte de lo que ha estado en cuestionamiento. Hasta antes de la pandemia, esta industria emitía más gases de efecto invernadero que todos los vuelos internacionales y el transporte marítimo combinado. Y cada segundo se enviaba a un vertedero un volumen de ropa equivalente a un camión de basura. Con el COVID-19 el efecto económico fue fuerte, una pérdida a nivel mundial de más de 1.500 millones de dólares. La industria de la moda rápida comenzó a mostrar sus debilidades, entre ellas que su cadena de suministros y fuente de manufactura se encuentre casi en su totalidad emplazada en China. Esto se justificaba quizás en el pasado, cuando lo único que se buscaba era la rentabilidad. Hoy la lógica de los consumidores son distintas y requieren que la cadena de producción sea no solo de calidad, sino que también ética, tanto con los seres humanos como con el medio ambiente. ¿Puede esta industria sobrevivir ante estas exigencias? ¿Seguirá el diseño de moda encasillado como una disciplina que solo brinda belleza a vestimentas y accesorios para ser consumidos masivamente? Nuestra respuesta está clara. Necesitamos formar diseñadores que cuestionen lo establecido y que además propongan soluciones que permitan a esta industria reformarse. Diseñadores que entiendan que la fabricación de un producto involucra aspectos comunicacionales, medioambientales, culturales y humanos. Diseñadores capaces de integrar nuevas tecnologías a sus procesos con la rapidez necesaria. Diseñadores dispuestos a contribuir con el desarrollo sostenible. Por estas razones fundamentales es que el proyecto Visible apunta a que ustedes, los futuros diseñadores, desde el inicio de sus carreras académicas, aborden desafíos colaborativos desde diversas partes del mundo que hoy convocan a Uruguay y a Chile. Los invito a trabajar en su profesión, teniendo en cuenta que el futuro se construye desde nuestras acciones y en el presente. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Ale. Quiero invitar ahora al director fundador de la Escuela Integra, Pablo Jiménez. Pablo.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Dani. Buen día a todas, buen día a todos, estudiantes, docentes, Alejandra, Natalia, Majo, Dorte, un gusto que estés con nosotros. Bueno, primeramente, también me sumo a las palabras de Alejandra y de alguna manera celebrar, es una instancia de celebración, que podamos estar en esta modalidad, que de alguna manera sí le encuentro algo muy positivo, es que podamos articular diferentes intereses y prácticas con un muy buen fin y motivo, que es trabajar en conjunto, en sinergia, por generar logros y cultivar en nuestros estudiantes y docentes este espíritu colaborativo que me parece muy importante y que de alguna manera celebra este proyecto Visible, que se comparte a partir de este año junto a estudiantes de diseño gráfico de Universidad del Desarrollo, la Facultad de Diseño, junto a estudiantes de diseño y moda, junto a nuestros estudiantes de producción y comunicación de moda y estudiantes de diseño e indumentaria. O sea, más de 100 estudiantes, Dorte, que van a estar generando esta actividad y me parece sumamente importante, y para el proyecto en sí es un gran desafío y, bueno, y muy emocionante lo que estaremos transcurriendo todos juntos y todas. Así que bueno, por mi parte, bueno, felicidad de expresar esa felicidad, de expresar este puente que comienza a tenderse con nuestros hermanos, amigos y amigas y hermanas chilenos y chilenas. Y bueno, feliz de poder hoy estar con ustedes y que Dorte nos esté acompañando. Para mí, en lo personal, el trabajo de Dorte es sumamente inspirador, sumamente alineado a la propuesta que tiene Visible. La conozco a Dorte por medio de una docente, Paula Delgado, que fue en la que nos generó el contacto, y bueno, y ese universo al descubrir, el universo que Dorte construye junto a sus colaboradores y colaboradoras, bueno, nos parecía de lo más pertinente que nos acompañara en este inicio de esta actividad. Así que, Dorte, muchas gracias eh, por compartir con nosotros tu trabajo. Muy bien, gracias a todas y a
Muchas
todos.
gracias, Pablo. Muchas gracias.
Por
Hoy
favor.
tenemos como invitada, como decía Pablo, a Dorte, quien es fundadora de la revista Lizón, que ha trabajado con medios impresos y digitales para estudios de diseño boutiques y para clientes de moda y lifestyles en Berlín, Londres, Lisboa y Múnich. Estamos seguros de que su experiencia les va a servir de referente para este proyecto Visible 2021. Quiero dejar nuevamente a ustedes a Pablo Jiménez, quien nos va a introducir en esta conversación con Dorte y le va a realizar algunas preguntas.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Daniela. Sí, como ya mencionaba en lo anterior, en las palabras anteriores, bueno, comentarles un poco para aquellos que no conocen el trabajo de Dorte. Ella dirige una revista que ella ya nos estará contando un poco cómo es el funcionamiento, cuál es ese proceso creativo detrás de esta publicación, de esta plataforma digital. Ahí está. Miren qué emoción. Esa es una prueba, bueno, ahora nos estará comentando. Y bueno, y para eso preparamos algunas preguntas también para conocer en primera persona acerca de ese proceso creativo. Y la primera pregunta, Dorte, que te voy a formular tiene que ver con cómo nace Lizón. ¿Cómo nace este proyecto y cuál es el interés que te ha generado en ti desde lo personal para poder llevarlo adelante?
Well, first of all, can you hear me now? No?
Yes,
Sí,
we can.
Ah, yeah.
perfecto.
Perfect. Very good. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's very exciting for me. It's actually my first webinar, so it's all also technically very new and exciting. So about your question, how I started LISM, how it all came about, was already back in 2013 until 2015. I was working at Elle Magazine as a graphic designer and art director at the time. And I think it was back then that it was really the first time for me that I experienced this glossy world of fashion or traditional fashion media firsthand. And even though I loved working there, I had really lovely colleagues. I was also, how can I say, it was also a disturbing experience. Like there were quite a few things that I found very negative. Like I experienced the fashion world as fairly superficial. I saw there was a lot of wastefulness. And I also found there was quite a lot of cruelty in the way, first of all, like the standardized forms of beauty that were being promoted all around me. But it also spiked my interest, and I was starting to look more into how is fashion actually produced? How much fashion do we consume? So whilst I was in this world, I was kind of diving further in and asking questions. And well, as you know, there are, as you addressed earlier, there are quite dark sides to fashion. And so whilst I was working there, I was wondering, and I think this question has even increased over the last years. I believe that we are living in very essential times, like with the climate crisis accelerating. I mean, now even being increased by the pandemic. I feel we are in a time of massive change. So I felt like it's not relevant anymore what I'm seeing here and what this kind of media, this traditional media is producing. And I was wondering, should we not rather ask ourselves, like, what kind of world is it that we want to create? And I think that led me to my personal response. And I asked myself, could I create fashion media that is almost the opposite, that is very meaningful, that is thoughtful, that is gentle, that is caring, that really creates relationship and don't just pushes product, more product, more product. And that really cares about the well-being of everyone involved, like from the growing of resources to the production of clothing, to the making of the garments, to yeah, like also to the people then buying and owning and hopefully mending the clothes. And so yeah, I think that was, I was wondering, Pablo, I prepared a presentation with some slides to it. Should I also share that? Because I think that would actually be quite...
Sí, por favor.
Hang on.
Por supuesto.
Oh, it said host disabled participant screen sharing. Is there a way you can... Now, let me see. No, it
Daniela,
says...
¿y tú puedes colaborar?
Dame un segundo para coordinar con Pia. Estamos en eso.
Ok.
No worries.
Mientras esperamos, Dorte, que podamos compartir tu presentación, qué interesante tu introducción y justamente considero que es muy alineado a los objetivos que plantea Visible en nuestro proyecto, que es un proyecto editorial, como te lo había comentado previamente, simplemente que se realiza en conjunción con muchos estudiantes y con docentes. Y bueno, nada, y sí, obviamente la gran temática, el gran disparador que encontramos en Visible, y esto es algo fundamental que nuestros estudiantes lo entienden así, tiene que ver con esta preocupación hacia donde el diseño colabora y donde el diseño se alinea con la sustentabilidad y con el cuidado, ¿no? Con el cuidado hacia el medio ambiente y que contempla aspectos sociales, vulnerabilidades diversas. Y bueno, y es una herramienta para nosotros también de comunicación, y qué mejor que en la práctica estudiantil podamos ser tan realistas, ¿no? No solamente con un entorno profesional, sino también con una situación que nos involucra a todos. Por lo cual tu trabajo es muy motivador, y creo que por lo que estás comentando es perfecta cómo se va alineando. Y espero que nuestros estudiantes puedan sacar muchos apuntes, muchas notas acerca de tu proceso.
Dorte, en la parte inferior de tu menú, donde mismo pusiste el idioma, hay un botón verde que dice compartir pantalla. Ese es el que tienes que poner. Apriétalo y vas a poder compartir.
I clicked it and it says host disabled participant screen sharing. I think
Ok,
you
lo
have...
vamos a compartir nosotras de inmediato. Ahí está.
Yes. There it is. Ah, no, it's from your side. Perfect. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, this was the first question you asked me, and when I initiated the LISM and I started the magazine, well, one thing I also wanted to mention is like the the meaning of the word listen. So it was very important for me to have this gentle approach, this approach really circulating around well-being. And I found this word listen, which comes from an old English word, and it carries the meaning graceful and gentle. So that's actually the name, or the meaning behind the name, the listen. So it kind of is a name that is also a program for the magazine. So should I continue? Yeah, with the second question. So the second question you asked me was, how does stylism intertwine the aspects of sustainability, fashion, and graphic design? And what I would say to that is, like, one thing that really interested me right from the start was finding a new way of storytelling. Like I had the feeling when I looked at traditional fashion media, but then also about at new initiatives about sustainability, I found either a lot of like negative discourse, like showing things that didn't work, or quite like crass pictures, a lot of moralizing, and a lack of beauty. And what I always loved about fashion was really the aspect of working with beauty, working with joy, working with expression, like a sense of like theatrical expression, and creating also like dream worlds. So we made a very conscious decision right from the start to tell things in a gentle way and in a way that is beautiful. Like really use what I love about fashion, what I've always loved about fashion, like the power of imagery, and also the power to like really make people dream, and really use that to kind of then make them dream of better worlds, of other worlds that could be possible. I saw such a big potential there that, I mean, in media, we have the power and we hold the power that we can create visions of another future, a better future. And often, like when I look around myself, I see a lot of dystopian stories. And I feel at the moment people are really often lacking the vision of how our world could be different, of how things could be done in a more caring and empathetic way, how the future could look like, other than like a dystopian novel or like Blade Runner. Yeah, so that was really the starting point. And I also noticed, like when I thought about like what does beauty actually mean, I felt that at the moment the way we use fashion is a very superficial form of beauty. I would call it glamour. Like it's very, but we really leave out the aspect of beauty that I would describe as a very joyful, like soulful and almost spiritual expression, something that can like really connect us to our higher being, of understanding the like awe and beauty of being alive, of the wonder of being in this like amazing universe. So I really decided to work with beauty, but beauty in a very like wholesome and holistic way, and use it in order for us to like really feel in relationship with like the clothes we make, the clothes we wear, the nature that gives us the beautiful resources, the animals that give us like the beautiful fibers we can use, and then really go into the relationship of the makers, the great craftspeople, instead of feeling alienated by very fast-paced fashion that is done in very mainly efficiency-driven ways. Yeah, I would say that is where I come from.
Perfecto. Muy bien. Esta justamente es una pregunta para nosotros es sumamente importante. Es cómo el diseño entrelaza los aspectos de sostenibilidad, moda y diseño gráfico, ¿no? Creo que es una pregunta anterior a esta, a la que estás mostrando en la placa, que es la pregunta, justamente, tú podés comentarnos, Dorte, cómo es que podés llegar a entrelazar a partir de, de esta preocupación que tú sentís o de esta visión que querés manifestar en tu publicación, cómo se entrelazan, cuál es la importancia que tiene cada uno de estos aspectos en la construcción de cada número o de cada publicación.
I mean, do you mean how we select who we work with and what kind of projects we show, what stories we bring, or?
No, se relaciona a la pregunta, según en tu presentación, que es la pregunta número 2, que es la pregunta anterior.
Yeah.
Exactamente. Si bien tú, como mencionaste, justamente entiendo que en la respuesta se relaciona más a los aspectos generales, pero nos gustaría como hilar un poco más fino justamente en estos aspectos y en la relación que existe para ti, por ejemplo, a nivel diseño gráfico, ¿no? ¿Qué es lo que intentás transmitir con el diseño o con el arte seleccionado? ¿Apoya de alguna manera esa visión que tú tenés de la fotografía y de la moda en sí? ¿Por qué elegís desde esa tipografía o de la diagramación en general? A eso era la pregunta, un poco más técnica.
Okay, I understand. Well, first of all, I have to say I love photography. As I mentioned before, I really believe in the power of imagery. And I would say I do the design and the layout of the magazine myself. And I would describe myself as a more traditional, like I really like classical typography. I can really love and understand very like wild and experimental typography in other publications, but I made the decision to really give the images the space and the power to shine. So that was a decision I made from the start. I love typography, and I love white space. But I think it's more like the emphasis is really giving breathing ground on then really letting the images shine. And yeah, I would say you can see that throughout the publication. I mean, I have the publication here, and it's more like, I mean, here you can see we decided on a new binding now. So we have the contents right at the start, because I thought it's important so people can already get an idea of like the content. I also very much care about the content, but then you can open it.
Perfect.
And you drive, and like you were really in the midst of like wild nature, which was very important for me. But then you have this very subtle poem next to it that again is very classical, very humble, that talks about rewilding. And I kept it that way because I just wanted a very subtle focus. I didn't want, I mean, I understand, I think there is a good place for typography that is almost an art in itself, but I wanted a stillness, like really have a focus on the text and a moment of contemplation. So I would say, yeah, also the graphic design of the LISM is very meditative and contemplative. It's giving you a still space where you can dive in and, yeah.
Perfecto. Bueno, muchas gracias por esta respuesta. Me queda clarísimo y creo que a todos. y es sumamente importante apoyar ese concepto donde dejas respirar y dejas que la fotografía tome el protagonismo que para ti significa, y bueno, eso nos queda clarísimo con tu publicación. Ahora sigamos con esta pregunta, que justamente habla del criterio que tú tenés para seleccionar los proyectos, las colaboraciones, los entrevistados, la curaduría, ¿no?, en general de lo que es cada número, y cómo funciona el colectivo de profesionales que integra el ISO.
Yeah, perfect. I would say the LISM community has been grown very organically. At the beginning, it was just me with a bit of a crazy idea starting to publish. And it really started growing in the way that people started to notice and they started to get in touch. So the first person who got in touch with me, you see actually standing in white, it's Sophia. At the time she's a stylist. At the time she was very pregnant. And she found the magazine online and she reached out and she said, I love your message. I want to be part of it. So, and then we started working together on doing fashion editorials. And then the third person who joined was Ana Rosa. She is a photographer. You see her standing in the middle of the picture. And we are now the core team here in Berlin. Like the three of us work together very closely, and we take the creative decisions together. But also over the years, like many people reached out to us from different parts of the world, like photographers or stylists or writers who just came up and proposed ideas they wanted to do. And when we felt like it was a good fit, they had a very similar mindset to us, a similar way of expression, we started to collaborate. But again, it's been a very organic process. And it's also, I mean, I have to mention, this is not a project that I started in order to create profit. It was from the start, it's like a creative endeavor and an artistic expression. So it's just a lot is about collaboration and about a bit of improvisation as well. Yeah, coming together. And the way we choose who we work with, or we choose our projects or stories we want to talk about, or the people we want to present, also very much follows what I talked about earlier. It's really, well, on one hand, we're looking for a high quality of work. I think that was very important for me. Like, I love high craftsmanship in fashion. And I also love high craftsmanship in photography, in styling, in all the different creative endeavors. So I think that is one starting point. If I see, or if we see there is that, then that is the first entrance point. But then just as importantly is that with the people we work with, it's very important for us that they have a similar approach, that they really care about the stories, that they tell stories that can be thought-provoking, that should be thought-provoking, but in a way that is gentle and is inclusive, and really like takes people in rather than pushing them out. Like, that's a very important thing. And then about the stories we tell, it's really stories that we feel at some level have like are positive examples of how we could create change. Either we introduce pioneers, like people like brands we see as like doing really interesting work and are really good examples of a certain work. Like on the slide before, for example, is a story we recently did. It's a collective of creatives that work in the countryside in the UK. And what we loved about it was they moved away from the big city because, I mean, London is so, you can't afford anything anymore. And they found a new way for them, like living on this farm, working on this farm, and that gives them creative freedom, but that also is very much about them collaborating, not seeing each other as competition, but really coming together and helping each other out in their different professions and as a community, and working in a very localized way, and also understanding the power of changing, of being able to do things small and local, and by working together and coming together collaboratively, finding a way to exist in our like very globalized, very competitive world, and kind of creating a positive example. The story you're seeing here on the slide, wow, that was probably the most political story we've done so far. We traveled to, well, in Germany, in the west of Germany, near Cologne, we have Germany's largest coal mine that is still up and running. And there is a piece of forest, and it's been in the news a lot over here, but also internationally a little bit. And the forest is being destroyed since the late 70s. It used to be Germany's oldest ancient forest, like a beautiful abandoned ecosystem. And now, since 1978, 90% of it were completely destroyed because of the coal mine. And since 2012, there has been a group of activists who build these like, slightly crazy tree houses in the forest, and they've been living in the forest to protect the forest. And often they're being presented as like just activists. Often the media talks about them in a quite negative way. And we just wanted to see what it is all about. Like, what is the situation there? And it was interesting. So we came there, we talked to the activists, and we then decided to create a story about the experiences we had, but working together with the activists. And working also using clothing and using using fashion in a way that sort of takes them out of their normal activist role and shows them in a different way. So people can also like move away from the traditional way of like how they perceive the story. And find a higher narrative. And for me, on a personal level, this story showed very much, like I found the distraction very unbearable, like to see this huge mine. And I felt it was a good example also of like how in the past few hundred years, we really moved away from nature. We started to feel like this master, but not really giving a right to the nature, the trees, all the plant life, the animals, etc., and not giving them a voice, and just treating them almost like that matter, but not as other kin, other being that have a right to exist just as we do. So so we tell this story
increíble.
from a different way.
Sí, es como hermoso cómo cuentan esa historia. Justamente me quedo con lo que decís acerca de cómo tu visión o la visión de LISOM o la visión de marcas que participan también en esas producciones, ¿no? Que como son marcas de indumentaria, de accesorios, que también tienen los mismos valores, quizás enfocados desde otra área, pero cómo todos juntos participan y generan ilustran esa visión tan particular y tan efectiva que tenés tú y tu equipo. Así que bueno, felicitaciones. Es increíble cada una de las historias que he podido investigar. Uno quiere vivir dentro de LISOM, de cada página, desde lo personal. Lo siento así que hay una buena transmisión de esos valores y de esa seducción que también de alguna manera es una seducción que tiene como un objetivo de sanar, ¿no? También. Entonces, y creo que es el aspecto más positivo que la moda puede tener hoy en día. Bueno, Dorte, pasemos a la próxima pregunta, que tiene que ver justamente con cómo es el narrar, que nos puedas contar el proceso creativo involucrado en la última edición del LISOM, que pronto estará en versión impresa y que se podrá adquirir en todas partes del mundo, ¿no? Básicamente creo que tienen una conexión interesante también, la posibilidad que plantea que todos podamos tener el número impreso. Y queríamos saber cuál es ese concepto disparador que es tan importante, ¿no? Como esa guía en cada número, y bueno, y cuál es el próximo y qué significa conceptualmente para ti.
So yeah, we were publishing online for, gosh, 3.5 years, I think, before we then moved into print. And I think, I mean, we thought about it for a while because we also thought, well, should we really, it's paper, it's another resource, is it necessary? But then the internet also uses a lot of energy. So it's a bit of a question. You always use energy with everything you do. But the reason why we moved into print was because we really felt like we always put a lot of work into our story, and the internet is a very fast medium. So we just felt like all the love we put in there just disappears very quickly. People have a very short attention span, and it just made us feel that it's just not the right medium. We wanted to have something that people really treasure, that people have and they can keep and they can come back to, and they can sit down quietly on their chair and slowly have also the sensual and the physical sensation of like the beautiful paper stock and this intimate moment of just calmness and reading a magazine. So, and also having, which also then made us feel that every time we make a new edition, so this one is our second now, we really try to give it a topic and a theme that we hope will be relevant for the year to come. So we are always trying to sort of look ahead and see what could be a theme. So it was quite interesting. Our first issue was called Awakening, because we had the feeling, I mean, in Germany, Fridays for Future was getting very big, like Greta Thunberg, like people really slowly waking up to climate change. And yeah, we chose that because we had the sense it will grow, it will increase. And then, I mean, the pandemic happened. It was such a massive global awakening. It was more than we could ever imagine. But then when we worked on this one here, we wanted, well, let me go back quickly. I'm starting to lose myself. But what we normally do is we really sit down together and we first think about the theme, like what is the topic we want to talk about for the next year, what do we want to bring out to the world? And then we start making an editorial plan, like related to the topic. We think of what do we want to see there, what kind of stories, what kind of fashion stories, who do we want to talk with, who could be a good interview partner. Is there any topic that we would like to talk about? And then, like the editorial plan is coming together. And then we're starting to research contributors, like who could write the story or who could photograph the story, who would be a good fit. And then we start reaching out to people. But we also do a lot of things in-house, like we do a lot of the stories ourselves, like writing and doing the photography. And then it's really the stage of the doing, like starting to write, starting to produce the stories, like doing the fashion stories, the photography, etc. And that is normally quite a period, and I set a deadline. I say, okay, end of September, everything has to come back. Never works. And
Nunca.
but then at some point they come, and then it's the next stage of like really editing, like going through the text, seeing what needs to be cut out, what needs to be like working with the content. And then also starting with the layout and looking at how do we actually tell these stories on the pages, like how can we make them shine on the printed pages, and then combining and working with the text and the images to kind of make both of them as strong as possible. And yeah, when then the layout is set, we send it to our proofreader. We have a proofreader well, she's in Italy, but she is from the UK. She is a native speaker. And then we have to do the corrections afterwards. And then it's really like the stage of pre-press and like the print production. So then it's like we have to go through all the pictures and see they are like all in the right like color setting. They're all kind of how do you say, done perfect for print, etc. And then we start like working with the printers, and they tell us if everything is okay. They send us the proofs to like make sure the colors are all great. And then it's actually the big day, and we go to the printers and we stand on the big machines, and we make sure that everything is well. So like the thing you can see behind me is a printout that came directly from the printing machine. Yeah, and then
¿Cuántos meses fue este proceso para este número, para el próximo número impreso? En todo lo que venís contando, solamente para tener una noción de tiempo de todo ese proceso.
Well, last year it took us a whole year. Yeah.
Completo.
With the first issue, we were faster. It took us about 7 months or so, 7-8 months. But last year with the pandemic, everything got very slow, much more difficult. Yeah, 1 year.
1 año. Perfecto. Gracias. Y pasemos a esta pregunta que es como muy importante también conocer de primera mano el concepto. Conceptualmente, ¿qué significa para ti? ¿O qué significa para el equipo digamos, el tema que han elegido?
Well, as I mentioned before, we always try to kind of look ahead at what might be relevant. And when we decided on the topic, it was just like March, April 2020. So it was at the very start of the lockdown, the pandemic, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of fear, a lot of like difficulties. And we had the feeling that, I think it started with an energy. We felt like we wanted to give something to the world in a year's time that feels really joyful, very much like putting nature at the center, really giving a voice and a place to nature, and something that is healing. Because we felt there was a lot of trauma we were all experiencing. So I think the rewilding for us means really 2 things. Like on one hand, we believe that we really need to rethink our relationships that we have with nature. And at the time, we were also reading a very beautiful book called Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, who is a Native American and also a botanist from the United States. And she had this indigenous worldview of seeing the natural world and the plant world, and it left a big impression on us. And this is something like a spirit that we wanted to carry through the entire issue. So when you look at the two covers, like I called them the inner nature and the outer nature. And for me, the outer nature is really that. It's like really like embracing the joy and the expression and the energy, like having this beautiful plant, the nasturtium, and this very elegant woman being dressed in this plant. Like for me, it's a very joyful, strong cover. But then we also felt there was another aspect, and I don't know how you experienced the pandemic, but I felt it was very challenging on many levels, very different experience for different people. But I also felt it was a big interrupt of the status quo, and also a lot of like going into yourself, being confronted with yourself and having this inner view. And so we wanted to have a second aspect that is really going into your internal world and embracing, almost going through an inner rewilding, an inner rewiring, and an inner connecting to your own sensuality, your own physical needs. I mean, we have a beautiful article in the magazine about the power and importance of sensuality and pleasure in protest, and also the importance of just taking a break and slowing down and resting and having this contemplation as a political act. So it's these two things. It's like the inner rewilding and the outer rewilding.
Perfecto. Son muy, ambas portadas presentan una exquisitez también a nivel visual. Creo que es una muy buena invitación para lo que debe ser el contenido interno, y queda clarísimo también cuál es el foco, ¿no? Justamente que estás hablando en cómo estas temáticas muchas veces se expresan de una manera que el público en general la puede llegar a entender, pero la visión que plantea Lisom es como muy específica y como muy atractiva también para poder ingresar y conocer más, ¿no? Y empaparse. Bueno, Dorte, la última pregunta, después vamos a tener un espacio para preguntas de estudiantes, unas breves preguntas. Esto justamente creo que ya lo has conversado y lo has expresado, de cómo se modificó el proceso creativo durante la pandemia, pero de alguna manera, si querés agregar algo más o querés puntualizar algunos de los aspectos.
Yeah, I mean, it happened. I mean, I think the first drastic, like we had a lockdown in Germany in March. So just right when we started to work on the new issue, we couldn't actually produce anything. We weren't allowed like to work in teams. Everything was at a halt. Like people weren't working in the offices, like the factories, everything was on a standstill for probably 6 to 8 weeks. I don't fully remember, but probably 6 weeks. So it was very disorientating. And then, I mean, on a personal level, I also noticed like two of our team, Anna Rosa and Sophia, they have children. So all of a sudden they found themselves with the children and the work, and everything just became much more difficult to organize. A lot of work on top of work. And then we decided to reach out to our community, like various different people we collaborate with, we've been working with in the past. And we did a project called Eternal Wardrobe, Letters from Quarantine. And we just asked people to send us a picture of themselves in a piece of clothing that gives them comfort at this time, or that has a special meaning to them. And we wanted them to tell us why. And also we wanted to know what their situation was. So it was really that. And it was very interesting. It was just, I think at that time, it was People were experiencing the challenge in different ways, depending on, well, their personal circumstances and where they were. Yeah, we had, I mean, also in different parts of the world, there were people who were very hopeful, that really hoped that this was an interruption of the status quo that would then bring something new and better. But there were also just people being like really like struggling mentally. And I think what I experienced was also with our contributors, like with the first issue, things went a lot more smoothly. Like it really still worked that I would give the deadline and more or less people would respond to it. Like I could really plan. With this issue, the last one, I couldn't plan. Like everything was like all the plans went all overboard. And I also didn't feel in the position to really, I didn't want to pressure people. Like I didn't want to, I wanted to have things come together a bit more naturally, I guess, or like not be the one who puts extra pressure, but have it come together in its own course. So yeah, I think it's just been, well, for me personally, it was also, I had to react a lot more rather than being able to plan and then follow through a plan. It was a lot more like what would come to me at a certain time, whilst at the same time being in everything that the world just experienced. Like, I mean, also, yeah, hearing all these like tremendous stories of working conditions in countries like India, for example, like big fast fashion companies just dropping their orders or not paying for it, like seeing a lot of like suffering that I might not have experienced in Germany, but that I witnessed from further away. So yeah, I would say the pandemic really did have an effect, a strong effect. And after this year, it felt very beautiful to then finally see it come to life. And now just arrived on Monday. We got it from the printers. Like both the covers.
Increíble.
Felicitaciones. So, thank you. Thank you.
Es decir, que es un camino accidentado, pero sí, bueno, tiene un final y un final feliz, en este caso de Lison, que es un nuevo número que vamos a tener oportunidad próximamente de hojearlo, de vivir cada una de esas entrevistas, de cada uno de esos contenidos, que te lo transmitís de una manera, Dorte, que bueno, que casi ni es necesario ver la revista, sino como que abrís y dejás espacio a la imaginación, y creo que es una gran virtud para una editora, ¿no? El poder tener ese cuento personal tan fuerte y tan vivido y tan sensible para poder transmitirlo. Así que felicitaciones de mi parte. Desde hoy soy fan número 1 tuyo, y de Lison, por supuesto. Y creo que muchas y muchos también se van a sumar a este club de fans de Dorte y de Lison. Dorte, te quiero agradecer muchísimo por tu tiempo, por tu dedicación en esta entrevista, y ahora vamos a dejar espacio para que Daniela pueda habilitar algunas preguntas de estudiantes, y muchas gracias. Gracias por compartir.
Muchas gracias, Pablo. Les cuento que las preguntas que enviaron desde Uruguay las va a realizar nuestra directora de Diseño de Moda y Gestión, Natalia Yáñez, y luego va a introducir las preguntas a José Williamson. Partimos entonces con Natalia.
Gracias, Dani. Dorte, tengo que decirle a Pablo que él será el segundo fan, porque yo soy la primera.
No,
yo soy tu primera fan después de esta presentación.
No nos peleemos por el club de fans.
No, la verdad es que esta invitación que te hicimos no pudo haber sido más más relevante para dar inicio a esta actividad académica que tenemos en conjunto con los alumnos de Uruguay y los nuestros chilenos, justamente porque cuando te escucho indicar que en tu número de la publicación donde aparecen estos activistas, quizás es la publicación más política que el ISOM ha realizado, creo que al verla y al escucharte, LISOM hace en todas sus ediciones y en cada página una acción política, justamente porque manifiesta tu manera de percibir la vida. Y eso es lo que hemos estado tratando de incorporar en el trabajo de nuestros estudiantes. El proyecto Visible tiene que ver con hacer converger, por supuesto, una manera de proyectar de manera sostenible, es entender nuestro entorno y nuestro entorno inmediato a nivel local, pero también regional. Este trabajo colaborativo que tenemos con Pablo y la Escuela Integra en Uruguay permite hacer un acto político desde la Facultad de Diseño y desde la creatividad, desde la disciplina, porque creemos en el trabajo conjunto y creemos, al igual que ustedes en la revista, que es posible la proyectación sostenible. Por lo tanto, la primera pregunta que hicieron nuestros alumnos en Uruguay es: ¿qué fue lo que te impulsó a enfocarte en la sustentabilidad y reconstrucción del medio ambiente, además de tener pensamientos sostenibles y una preocupación personal? ¿Y qué es lo que gatilló en tomar esta decisión, este acto político de decir, quiero hacer una revista de las características como LISOM? ¿Hubo algún hito en particular el día en que te sentaste frente al computador y dijiste, voy a hacer esta revista?
No, I think it was a slower process. Like, as I said before, at the time when the idea started to ripen was when I was living in Munich, away from Berlin, and I was working for our magazine in Germany. And I had been very excited to start this job. Like, I started there when they started the process of redesigning the magazine. But after having been in this environment for maybe a year, I started to feel uneasy. It was a lot of things that felt a bit toxic to me. Like, I didn't agree with the values that were being promoted. And I think that also led me to start reading more about it. So it was also really through literature. One of the first books I read was Kate Fletcher's Design Journeys. She is a professor for sustainable fashion in London at the Center for Sustainable Fashion. And I found her work very inspiring. And it really it was a Pandora's box. Like, as soon as I started to dive into, more and more and more and more questions opened up. First, I just thought, okay, how can you do things differently with respecting the rights of the workers? Then the materials. Then I realized, oh my God, where do materials come from? It's either, two of the main ones is cotton, the cotton industry, where we have massive water issues and pesticides, or we have fibers that are from oil, basically, fossil fuels. So it was going deeper and deeper. And then I think the core thing that I wasn't so aware of at the beginning, but that crystallized more in my head, was I really felt a sense of sadness. I felt like in our world, we produce so much, everything is so driven by more and more efficient. But what I was witnessing was that we are actually producing a lot of things that are cheap, that are not of amazing quality, that are done fast, and that we only have a very short relationship with. We have clothing we wear maybe one time and then we throw it away because we bought it at a very cheap shop. And I felt like, well, what does that actually do to us? What does that mean to us? And what do we do to our world? I mean, we know now that we are destroying the biodiversity, we are overusing the resources, instead of honoring what is given to us. But what are we doing it for? Like, does it make us happy? Does it make many of us happy? And the answers were more and more like, no, it doesn't. And I really started to believe what makes us happy, and is things that give us meaning, that understanding relationships, and really being in relationship with the things that we surround ourselves with. And I think that is this whole idea of like also thinking about the things that nourish our soul, that give us purpose. And I felt what I was witnessing was not creating purpose, it was creating insecurity and lack. Like, people were made to feel not good enough, not perfect enough, not slim enough, not pretty enough. And they were encouraged to fill this lack and this insufficiency with just buying more product, more fastly made product. And yeah, as we know now also, that's not how we can live in this world. We have to take better care of the world and of us.
Súper de acuerdo. La segunda pregunta que hicieron los alumnos en Uruguay dice así. El proyecto, la revista, LISOM, ha tenido una buena experiencia de financiamiento a través del crowdfunding. ¿Piensas que vas a seguir apelando a esa herramienta o imaginas un futuro en el que la revista se sustente por medios tradicionales como publicidad o suscripción?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, the first issue we fully funded through crowdfunding. I mean, it was a very new experience for us. We hadn't done it before. We weren't really sure if it would work. But I think because we had been building community for so many years, like we already had a following, we had so many brands and creatives that we worked with, that we knew personally, we managed to raise the funds for the first issue. But then for the second issue, it was I think crowdfunding is an amazing tool, but it is also very exhausting as a process. I think you have to maybe be a person who really likes that, but it's really, it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. You have to like really push it out to the world. You have to contact everyone you know. And for the second one, I thought, well, okay, this I don't know if I can do this in addition to all the other work that the magazine involves. And already for the first edition, we had introduced something that we called sponsored pages. So we didn't want to work with traditional advertising. We didn't want to just give space to anyone. I mean, the brands we work with, we have strong criteria, and we also didn't want to have just people like, I mean, it just didn't work on an ethical level. We couldn't take the money from people who didn't follow our beliefs. So what we did is we introduced something we called sponsored pages. Here, they're at the beginning of the magazine. And we got in touch with larger brands, and we proposed to them that we were going to plant trees in a very local project. It's actually in the village that Sophia Schwan lives in, and they are rewilding a part of the village. It's abandoned land, and they are growing like a really diverse range of old fruit trees mainly, but like from really old times, like really old varieties. And we decided that with the money we would get from the sponsors, we would take some of the money to buy trees and then plant them. and have a photographer take pictures of it and have it as a new form of advertising. We had no idea if this would work. We thought, well, we kind of thought maybe people think they're crazy. But actually, it kind of got quite a bit of interest. And we found some really like nice sponsors, but also sponsors that are kind of aligned. Like, for example, one of our sponsors is a beauty company called Veleda, and they themselves were founded 100 years ago on like holistic ways. They work with regenerative agriculture. So they are in a similar mindset, and they found it super interesting. So yeah, but this at the moment, it just covers the printing costs, because printing this magazine is very expensive. So now what we're actually looking into, and again, it's an experiment, and I don't know yet if it will work, but what I find interesting at the moment is that you now have platforms like Patreon, or in Germany, we have a platform called Steady. And this is really an idea that your community, your fans can support your work by giving very small donations, like say €3 a month. But they always give like a small donation, but then you have a lot of people who give a small donation, and that can then finance your work. So this is really something we're looking into at the moment, because it would allow us to keep our independence, our editorial independence. We would not have to kind of compromise. And we hope that in the future we can have like a model of working with sponsors, but sponsors that are really closely aligned to our values, and then having also really our community that supports our work. That's our future dream. Yeah.
Bueno, te agradezco ese compromiso que ustedes asumen con sus lectores. Mantenerse consecuente de principio a fin lleva al éxito a una iniciativa como esta. Así es que felicitaciones por ello. La tercera pregunta que realizaron los alumnos de Uruguay era relacionada al nombre de la revista, pero que ya nos contestaste muy generosamente, así es que le doy el paso a la directora de diseño gráfico, María José, para que pueda hacerte las preguntas de nuestros alumnos de Chile. Muchas gracias, Dorte.
Gracias, Natalia. Hola, Dorte. Bueno, para nosotros un verdadero honor tenerte aquí con nosotros. De verdad que ha sido una presentación muy inspiradora y en ese sentido también agradecerte, porque creo que tu ejemplo invita no solamente a los diseñadores y a los estudiantes de diseño a tener una postura y reflexionar frente al rol del diseño, tanto como evangelizador de repente de las visiones de masa o las visiones personales que podemos tener, sino que también el rol social que tiene en una comunidad. Así que de verdad agradecerte por eso, y bueno, sumarme también al fan club con Natalia y Pablo, así que bueno, de ahí lo vamos a formar. En Chile también surgieron algunas preguntas que me gustaría como hacerte, que tienen que ver con esta misma visión evangelizadora relacionada con la moda y la sostenibilidad o la sustentabilidad, que es bastante lejana a la cultura latina actual. Entonces, ¿tú crees que podría aplicarse algo así en Sudamérica? Y también, bueno, por supuesto, dejarte invitada a que vengas a darte una vuelta a Uruguay y a Chile cuando ya sea posible viajar. Pero en el entendido de la visión que tú tienes desde Europa, ¿crees que sería factible en Sudamérica poder aplicar algo así?
I mean, I have never been to Uruguay and Chile, and I would love to. So I can't talk as like an inside expert, but I think what I would say is that I feel it's a very universal way of looking at things, because it is I think something we have been experiencing, or it's an answer to something we've been experiencing globally as well. Like, I think what we've been trying to do with rewilding is also to question a worldview that we've been living with since maybe the Enlightenment, of where we really place the human being on the top, and where we started to see nature as something that is mechanical, that doesn't have rights of its own. And I would be interested to see what happens if we actually do give nature and animals a right. If we say, for example, there is a movement right now, like promoting ecocide, saying we need laws that actually give nature in importance. And I believe this is also conversations that are going on in your countries. I would say it's even, I find this is a conversation that in my own country, I find very little. My own country is very driven by this thinking of rationality and giving very little space to a dimension of emotions, of spirituality, of enchantment, of beauty. I find this very little in my own culture. But I believe it's a universal human need. But I think something also that has been pushed away through globalization, colonialization, like a certain dominant worldview that was kind of pushed onto the rest of the world. And I feel we're going through times of like liberation from that, and kind of seeing that this is just another form of ideology as well, that we can question and must question. So yeah, for me, I think it is a very, in that way, a very universally human endeavor of like, what is our place in the world? How do we want to treat each other? How do we want to treat the natural world and our fellow animals? And how do we create a world that kind of pays homage to that and gives credit to that and embraces it? And I feel, I mean, I actually think there are various countries in the world that are much further than the Western countries I'm used to, and where this thinking is still more prevalent and more strong, and cultures that we can really learn from. And I mean, I'd be interested to see also how it is in like Chile and Uruguay, like how your economies work. Like Paula from Aun, she told me a lot about like wool and the wool production, and I found it incredibly fascinating, like such a rich resource you have, and the way you have agriculture and the well-being of the animals. I think this is something, we in Germany might be more able to learn from you. So it's about interchanging information and experience, I would say.
De todas maneras, y yo creo que además hoy día tenemos una audiencia de estudiantes universitarios que son todos jóvenes, por lo tanto ellos van a contribuir a generar un poco esa visualización de estas necesidades un poco más de la naturaleza. La otra pregunta que también enviaron los estudiantes tiene que ver justamente con eso, cómo combinar la belleza con lo sostenible o lo sustentable. ¿Es un redescubrimiento de la naturaleza?
I actually only 2 weeks ago listened to a really beautiful talk by it was run by Slow Factory. They are an initiative from New York, and it was really about this topic, beauty and sustainability, something that I've been working with now for years. But I found it really interesting how she brought, the speaker was bringing the two of them together. And yeah, she also, what she mentioned and what I also have been working with very intuitively is with fashion, beauty is like an essential part of it. What we do is connected to it. But I think in the last decades, we've often been using it on a very superficial level, just on a plain surface level, just seeing the visual side of it, and often just a very glamorized version that is very narrow, like having one certain ideal of physical beauty, for example, like a very slim young woman, for example. But I think what we can do and how we can bring together beauty and sustainability is understanding the sensual and the soulful nature of beauty, like really anchoring beauty in the magical side of being alive, like using beauty to inspire people to see the beauty of the world, the beauty of relationships, the beauty of like plants growing and giving us fiber, the beauty of people being so talented with craftsmanship and making such amazing things, creating little miracles with that. And I think when it comes to that, of like really using a visual language that is connected to relationship, that is very deeply interconnected with sustainability, because then we start to have a different relationship to the things we make and we also buy, we have with us, a much more like lasting and close relationship that really also can give us meaning in our lives. It's not something we purchase quickly from a fast fashion company, but it's something we maybe made ourselves, or we knew someone and we created it together, or we bought it off from someone who we know the story from and we are connected to it. So for me, these two are strongly, both are, beauty can be nourishing. Yeah.
Perfecto, realmente inspirador. De verdad agradecerte, Dorte, por estos minutos que has tenido para venir a abrirnos la cabeza. Realmente ha sido muy, 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 muy interesante. Y bueno, de verdad, desearte a ti el mayor de los éxitos con este nuevo ejemplar de Lisón. Estaremos atentos a cuando salga nuevamente. Y también, bueno, desearle lo mejor de los éxitos a todos los estudiantes que nos acompañan hoy, que van a estar trabajando en su ejemplar nuevo de este proyecto visible.
Thank you. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Dorte. Un placer haberte conocido y recibir toda esta información, todo este conocimiento, toda tu visión. Fundamental, me sumo a las palabras de Majo, que es fundamental para el inicio de este proyecto, que el cual tomaremos como inspiración tu persona y tu obra y la de todo tu equipo. Así que, genial.
Bueno, con esto agradecemos a todos los asistentes, a Dorte, a nuestros alumnos chilenos, a nuestros alumnos de Uruguay, a nuestra decano, a Pablo. Así es que ahora a todos a ponerse a trabajar de manera creativa y poner todas las energías en que se pueden hacer cambios, así como nos enseñó Dorte. Así es que muchas gracias. Nos vemos en otra ocasión.